What's up, everyone? Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick, and we got another album review for you. Again, this one is brought to us courtesy of Screaming Toilet. Fun site, a lot of cool podcasts, reviews, and such. Pretty much covers all things pop culture. Generally more towards the underground, but generally that's how metalheads like it anyway. So today I'm reviewing Soiled by Blood's new album, Erit Sangius. This came out, I believe, a couple of months ago or a month ago on Amputated Vein Records. This is a brutal death metal band out of Quebec. They formed in 2008, and this is their second full length. Now I'm going to apologize right away because there's a fair amount of these songs that are in French or Quebecois, and, well, I'm not very good at pronouncing that sort of stuff. So I apologize to a lot of French-speaking nations on this one. So the album opens up with Shirong. I think that's how you pronounce it. Again, I'm sorry. Pretty much establishes itself right out of the gate as a very slam-oriented brutal death metal band. Comes in with a slam riff right away, and, you know, it kind of reminded me right away of Devourment, but to be fair, I don't listen to much slam, so a lot of slam bands remind me of Devourment. Has a nice straightforward groove to it, and you really get a feel for the production on this, which is polished but gritty. I kind of like the balance here. Like, drums are a little clicky, but the snare doesn't have that, you know, annoying slam snare, which a lot of people really love. Guitars are nice, crunchy, thick. Everything sounds really well done. The vocals are in a very low register naturally. They kind of range from a traditional death metal delivery, where you can actually hear some intonation in the voice and everything, but they also go down to the very, very low depths of slam metal, where it's a low gurgle compared to maybe drain unclogging. It's like now the opening riff carried throughout a good chunk of the song. I kind of got a little stale, but then they switched up and shifted over to some blast beats and some more intricate riffing, and even some dissonant riffing, and sort of remind me more of a band like Gorgasm, or even maybe Blood Red Throne, because there's actually some cool dissonant melodies and just some good syncopated chugs, which, you know, that's something I fucking love anyway. This moves into Chemin Funebre. Again, sorry. This one is definitely more straight up brutal death metal. It's very high speed, and it kind of harks back to like the early days of where this genre was forming around Suffocation and bands like Baphomet. It's like the songwriting on this one reminded me a lot of a band like Ingested, except with the core elements sort of stripped away. This is definitely more focused on death metal than anything deathcore or anything core related, honestly. Now, what I was actually taken back about was the presence of melodic leads, and these really pop up all over. They're not really very technical, but it's a stark contrast to how brutal the music is. They kind of remind me of the leads that popped up in Black Dahlia Murder's earlier works, where they were just kind of a cool melody just sprinkled in there, and while they weren't flashy and shreddy and technical, they really added something to the song, and it was a good, again, stark contrast. Now, this lead continues over a really cool dissonant part, which actually reminded me a lot of Immolation. And generally, Immolation's a very different style than Brutal Death, but it was kind of cool to see that incorporated in there as well. Now, the next track, Le Hériteur du Sang, sounds close. This song opens up with more of a double-time sort of stampede war march. I was really surprised by this because it didn't just go back to these tropes. This one actually harked back some melodic death, just a little bit there. Now, it shifts back to the slam riffs again, which I don't really have a problem with because I think they're used a little sparingly on here. They seem more focused on being a brutal death band than just going back and forth to slam riffs. They are present on here, but they're not the main wheelhouse. There's a lot of really cool, intricate riffing all over here, and definitely a lot of stuff that screams Cryptopsy worship, which, if you're from Quebec and you play brutal death metal, there's a good chance you really like that band. Now, I like how it shifts back and forth between these slam parts and this more melodic death sound, even coupled with a really cool lead on top again. Once again, very melodic too. So again, I like this contrast in sound. It actually makes these songs really stand out, and they don't just get, you know, thrown into a brutal death blender and kind of get lost. You know, I like dynamics like that. That's pretty cool for me. Now we actually have some songs here that are in English. Mind of a Psychopath. This one, I was so glad I didn't have to pronounce anything in French. I thought it was pretty funny that they actually sampled House of a Thousand Corpses in the opening, which, you know, I mean, horror movies are generally sampled all over the place, but I thought this was a, you know, cool one because it was done by a metal guy. Now, right away, this reminded me of Dying Fetus. Very straightforward. You know, not a huge standout track, but I was very refreshed that it was in English and I didn't have to pronounce anything strange. Now, probably the most slam-oriented song on here would be Legions. This one really keeps that mid-tempo groove, and the slam riff is very out front. The vocals are extra low and gurgly. This one was the one that pretty much just stayed in that realm. It did break it up periodically with some blast beats and some intricate riffing, but mostly it really stuck to the slam riff. And that one kind of lost me a bit just because I'm not really a slam fan. I do like brutal death, but, you know, slam is just kind of a thing I'm not generally into. It's just kind of it's just a personal preference. So throughout this album, the drumming is intense, and I have to say the drummer really reminds me of a guy like Trey Williams from Dying Fetus. Like, just insanely quick, nuts fills and everything, and the double bass work is insane throughout. Really, really good work there. Now, one of the standouts for me on this album across the board is Devouring the Earth, and not just because it was a title in English. This one actually had really cool dissonant melodies to open it up with. Had a nice slower opening. It didn't just go full bore into a slam riff or blast beats. There's nice sections of isolated bass work where you can actually hear the bass tone, which unfortunately is kind of invisible throughout most of the album, but that was a nice little moment where I actually hear it, and it sounds really good. So I like the transitions between the really dissonant, kind of creepy melodies and then right into like these nice palm muted chugs that, well, we all love. There were even some parts in here that reminded me of Hypocrisy. That kind of leaned more towards a really heavy melodic death metal sound. And I thought this one was probably the most adventurous track on here. I really dug the writing on there, and this one really grabbed me right away. Now, not necessarily a knock of the album, but the remaining two tracks after this track really ended very similarly. Pretty much just sticking to their roots. They didn't really have a lot of dynamic songwriting in the following two tracks. They just seemed pretty much more like standard fare compared to that one. And I liked how Devouring the Earth was much more musically adventurous, but still stuck to the roots of brutal death metal. These remaining two just seemed like they were kind of tacked on there. Not that they were bad, they just didn't have the same impact. There were parts in Immolaire L'Immanquable, sorry, again, that really reminded me of like Dying Fetus, especially Kill Your Mother, Rape Your Dog, which, you know, I love that song and it's pretty much a staple in every show for them. But unfortunately, none of the stuff in here really stood out towards the end. Like, it wasn't like, you know, you didn't have your big grand closer to seal a deal. You just had, you know, some pretty decent songs, but a lot of ideas that you heard earlier in the album, and nothing that made you think, oh wow, this closes on such a brilliant spot to make it more memorable. So all in all, I'm going to give this one 3.5 stars. I really enjoy most of this album. I think it's really solid brutal death metal. It doesn't really rely too much on the slam riffs. It actually brings a lot of cool intricate riffing. The drum work is solid, and you know, there's a lot of cool cryptopsy worship on here, but at the same time you get like nice groovy headbangable songs, and it's just a solid album. So if you like the review, give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel, subscribe, because we do shit like this all the time. Catch you guys later.